Alright. I want you to go ahead and count what your longest streak is. So I believe mine was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I had a streak of 10, and I don't think I had any longer.
I got 4.
You got 4, so Trayvon, your longest streak was 4, right? What was your longest streak on me? 5. Trayvon, or Trayvon, what was your longest streak? 8. So Ron, what was your longest streak? 11. 11. Looking all crazy. Nelson, what was your longest streak? 6. Alright. And then Mark, what was your longest streak? 3. Alright. So what we have here, so what we look at there is we want to look at what our longest streak, like what the longest streak that we have. Alright. And this is going to make more sense when we start talking about the sports aspect. Right? So, the idea here is that one-on-one home quarterback. But the idea here is that we want to look at streaks in a performance, all right? And in this case, we were flipping the quarters, and we're measuring the streaks. So what we would do at that point is this would act as sort of our simulation, is we would record our longest streaks, and then make a dot plot, all right? And reading this dot plot will be done the exact same way as we've been doing past chapter. Alright? So doing something like this dot plot right now necessarily wouldn't be, I mean, you can't really read it because you don't have a test statistic. Alright? So you need a test statistic to read the dot plot. Alright? Now, moving forward, we're going to use the stats from different athletes, different teams, and calculate test statistic, and sort of draw conclusions about whether or not a player or team can go on a hot streak, all right, versus being on fire in a basketball game, or they can go on a cold streak. If you miss a bunch of shots in a row, does that mean that you're now on a cold streak, meaning that you have a greater ability to miss the next shot if you miss a whole bunch of shots in a row? All right. So what we're going to look at, and this is the first part of the note that you need to write down, all right, is
so we had to write this most time now. You can nobody right now. Absolutely.
Alright, so the first thing that you need to write down, all of this domination, is does a hot hand exist in sports? Now, in order to figure out if the hot hand exists in sports, there's a few things we have to understand. First of all, we have to understand what does it mean to have a hot hand in sports. Okay. So, a player has the hot hand or has a hot hand in sports if his or her ability to be successful is higher following a success than following a failure. Alright? Yeah. So Nelson, start writing. Alright. Player has the hot hand. His or her ability to be successful is higher following a success than following a failure. what that means is if I'm shooting free throws and I'm making free throws, if I have the hot hand, that means since I've made the free throw, I have a higher chance of making this next free throw. And then if I make that free throw, I have an even higher chance at making the next free throw. If I make that free throw, I have a higher ability, all right? I would have a higher ability at making this next free throw. And if I make it again, I have an even higher ability to make the next free throw. Okay? On the other hand, if I miss my free throw, it's saying that I would have a lower ability to make the next free throw. Okay? So, when a player has the hot hand, the percentage of successes following a success will be higher than the percentage of successes following a failure. So what it's saying is essentially, if you make a free throw, or if you make a field goal, or you're successful in one thing, you have the hot hand. That means that your ability is going to be higher. Your ability to be successful is going to be higher following any time that you're successful. All right. Questions about that? Yeah. Some of you may have heard the video game NBA Jam, where if you make 3 shots in a row without the other team scoring, okay, then you're on fire. At that point, if you shoot pretty much anywhere on the court, as long as it's not like past half court or someone or a defender is jumping at you, you're gonna make a shot until they make a shot. All right. So that's sort of like in a case of where the hot hand comes into play at sports. Like you always, if you watch sports, you always might have heard, like if, for instance, LeBron James or Kevin Durant or someone of that nature, they start making all their shots. They make a bunch of shots in a row or something like that. And the first thing the announcers go, the announcer says, hey, he's on fire. All right. So, if you talk to announcers, you talk to athletes, they will probably say, yeah, okay, the hot hand does exist. You can get on fire. Okay, the hot hand exists. Now, the argument that comes into play is it you know better than that? No? You're not taking notes fast. No. Alright. The argument that comes into play now, yes, is the idea of shots being independent. Alright? Not just shots, any kind of like attempt field goals, shots, saves, at-bats. These are all, what statisticians would argue is that these are independent. So an athlete's attempt at independent, is his or her ability to be successful is the same following a success and following a failure. Alright? So what this is saying is, no matter what happens, alright, I always have the same ability to be successful following a success or a failure. So if I'm, again, going back to shooting, let's say free throws, if my attempts are independent, alright, and I shoot a free throw and I make it, my ability to make the next shot stays the same. all right? Even if I had missed that first shot. So what it's saying is, essentially, is the fact that I missed or make a shot, that doesn't affect my ability. All right? My ability is not going to increase after a make or a success, and it's not going to decrease after a failure or a miss. Okay? So if we say a player has the hot hand, then we are saying his or her attempts are not independent. So if Dominique has the hot hand, we're saying that her attempts are not independent. We're saying that what happens on this shot affects what happens on the next shot. Okay. Again, I'll make sure we're getting this written down. What? What?
Go on paper.
Something with paper?
It's like, oh. Okay, no.
Yeah, so the important thing here is, understand, that if you say someone has the hot hand, their attempts are not independent. So that means that if you say Dominique has a hot hand, her result on this, whatever she's doing, her result on this shot, her result on this at-bat affects what happens at the next at-bat or shot. If we're saying that she does not have the hot hand, then we're saying that her attempts are independent. So what we'd be saying then is her attempts are independent is her result on this shot does not affect what happens on the next shot. Okay? So, oh, yep, there we go. Nice writing.
What?
All I said is the first day of the meeting, always writing.
Copy the paper and choose.
We have that kind of paper.
I.
Alright, so hot versus good. So we need to make this distinguish, or we need to distinguish between the idea of hot hand or just being good. Okay? If a basketball player makes 90% of his free throws, alright, let's say that I go out and shoot 100 free throws, I make 90. That does not imply that I have the hot hand. Right? It does not imply that I had a hot hand. I might just be a good free throw shooter and have a high ability to make free throws. Okay? So again, the fact that I went out and made a bunch of free throws does not prove that I have a hot hand. Simulations and stuff. Alright, so now when we say a player has a hot hand, we're saying the player has a greater ability to make a shot following a made shot, following a missed shot. Okay. So if Sir Ron is up there shooting, we're saying Sir Ron has a hot hand, alright? We're saying Sir Ron has a greater ability to make a shot after a made shot than after a missed shot. Okay. We don't have written down that stuff in the blue right there. I'm just trying to help you guys out. Okay, so now this bottom part is probably the most important part on this this slide. The making a high proportion of shots does not give evidence of a hot hand. That's kind of the same thing that the top said, but again, it's that important. Just because you make a high proportion of shots, that does not tell us, that does not give us the convincing evidence that we need that you had a hot hand, or that player had a hot hand, or that team had a hot hand. All right. To measure this, we need something besides the proportion of made shots. We need something besides the proportion of made shots. We are going to look at sort of patterns. We look at streaks inside of simulations. So yeah, and what we're going to find out, and what we're going to see here, guys, is telling you. And I've graded a number of the investigations so far, and they've been pretty good. The math that we're going to be doing here is not changing too much from what we did in the past year. We're still going to have dot plots. We're going to read the dot plots the same way. So if you felt comfortable doing that, you should feel comfortable doing this as well.
I did? Oh.
Alright. A few more seconds to write the rest of this down. Hold on, what's the other one? Huh? Yep. Hold on, where it's what? Yep. I slept horrible last night.
I got one of those.
Yeah, it must be really good. Yeah, so Ryan?
Hey. What?
What?
There's some of them.
No, that's about that? Real.
What?
Probably like ABC.
No, because the mention
Maybe NBC.
is. Oh, my God, I got it.
Which branch?
No, the public, I was just saying,
Alright. I'm moving on. You guys have been down, right? I don't master take notes on television.
I've been there. I wasn't. Until I get in the game,
Am I good to go? Alright. So we're gonna look at an example here. I do want you don't need to write down the you don't need to write down like the C's and I's, but I want you to write down that top part, which is black. Yep. Alright. So, in case you don't know, Tony Romo, that's quarterback. He also is soft tonight in your beginning. In his game, he plays for the Dallas Cowboys, by the way. I didn't put that up there because I just assumed most people know that. But in his game on September 7th, 2008, probably got injured, but Tony Romo had a streak of 9 consecutive completed passes, suggesting that he had the high. Alright. So what you see in the C's and all those C's and I's, C's represent completion, complete. The I represents incomplete. What? Alright. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to sort of walk through this, all right, and use this to sort of draw a conclusion about, did Tony Romo have the hot hand? All right. So, what we're going to do here, all right, this is his actual performance. Okay. Now, the question that we're trying to figure out is, does this streak of 9 successful performances give convincing evidence that Romo had the hot hand? All right. So does this streak of 9 completions convince us and give us convincing evidence that Tony Romo had the hot hand during this game? Okay. Now, on the other hand, if he didn't have the hot hand, it would be because this streak of 9 completions was due to random chance. All right. So, was this streak of 9 completions due to Tony Romo having the hot hand, or was this streak of 9 completions due to random chance? Okay. Now, in order to do this, in order to come up with a conclusion here, we have to create some things. First of all, we have to have our hypotheses. All right. So we're going to have to create a hypothesis. And in this case, we're going to. Okay. So previously, I was saying, okay, you guys have to have your hypothesis. Say something about you have to have the word same ability or greater ability. Your same ability for your null hypothesis, greater ability for your alternative hypothesis. Okay, we can still do that, but we're gonna change it around just a little bit, make it a little bit shorter. All right. We also need to have our test statistic. Okay. Now, yes. So typically, what we would have to do to get our test statistic is calculate the winning percentage for like home and road track. All right. Now, to get our test statistic in these cases, what we're going to do is we're going to find our longest streak. The longest streak here was 9. So our test statistic is going to be 9. All right. So the test statistic. Okay. The test statistic equals longest successful streak. All right. So in this case, it is 9. Now, we also need to have our hypotheses. Okay? So, our null hypothesis is always going to be something about having the same ability after a success or after a failure. All right? So, in this case, one way we can write our null hypothesis, all right, is like this. And I want to write this down too. Why is that? So, all right. Our null hypothesis. Tony Romo has the same ability to complete anywhere passes after a completed pass or and. I know, that's why you're going to write this down, and then I'm going to show you the shorter way of writing it. Okay? So the null hypothesis is assuming, all right, that he doesn't have a hot hand. It's saying he has the same ability to complete a pass. We're going to, but I want to show you first the shorter way to write this. All right? So in this, what we're doing is our null hypothesis. We are assuming that Tony Romo has the same ability to complete a pass after he completes the pass, and after an incomplete pass. All right. So what that is saying is that he doesn't have the hot hand. So a shorter way of writing this null hypothesis would be, all right, if we go back, all right. So right here it says if an athlete's attempts are independent, or an athlete's attempts are independent, if his or her ability to be successful is the same following a success and following a failure. So in this case, we said Tony Romo's ability to complete a pass is the same following a completed pass and an incompleted pass. So what we're saying is that his attempts are independent. So a shorter way of writing your null hypothesis. All right. We'll just write this in red. Tony Romo's. I'll make sure it's down correctly. Pass attempts are independent. All right. Tony Romo's pass attempts are independent. What that is saying, because we know independent means that he has the same ability to complete a pass if he completes a pass or following a completed pass and following a incomplete pass. All right. So Tony Romo's pass attempts are independent. Now, notice in this case, I don't have anything about same ability. That's because the word independent refers to the same thing and having the same ability following a completed pass and following an incomplete pass. So either one of these null hypotheses are correct. Obviously, this is much shorter. All right. Now, our alternative hypothesis would be what? Okay, so a good alternative hypothesis would be Tony Romo has a greater ability to complete passes after a completed pass than after a incomplete pass. Okay, we can write that all the way down. Good. That's a lot of writing, so I'm going to write it down. That way you guys write it down. All right, so we're used to writing our alternative hypothesis as was in my car, but I ain't done
Alright, so that's what
Alright. So, like we said, 'cause I like to make you guys right sometimes, right? But mainly because I want you guys to understand what the alternative hypothesis is and how we can implement this new terminology into this. Alright, so the alternative hypothesis would be Tony Romo has a greater ability to complete passes following a completed pass then following an incomplete pass. Okay, so we have a new term, a new vocabulary phrase, all right, that says the same thing, but in like 2 words. All right, we're saying Tony Romo has a greater ability to complete passes following a completed pass than following an incomplete pass. All right, well, we just said, if we go back and look at our notes, I'll come back to this in just a second. Okay. A player has the hot hand if his or her ability to be successful is higher following or a success than following a failure. So let's go back and look at this. Did we just say that Tony Romo has a greater ability to be successful following a successful pass attempt than following an incomplete pass? Yes. So a nice, easy way to write our alternative hypothesis would be Tony Romo has the hot hand. What are you doing already? Alright, Tony Romo has the hot hand. Alright? So in this case, look, it's shorter. It says the same thing though. Okay? Having the hot hand means that you have a greater ability to be successful following a success than following a failure. Tony Romo has a hot hand. So, our null hypothesis, Tony Romo's pass attempts are independent. Our alternative hypothesis, Tony Romo has a hot hand. Yes, you can still write them with the words same ability and greater ability. But with this new vocabulary we have, we're able to sort of shorten our hypotheses, but still say the same thing. All right, now, you missed all that. You're late. So, here's what we're going to do. We have our test statistic with 9 because that was our longest streak. We now have our hypotheses. Okay? So now, in your guys' investigation, what you typically would do now is you need to simulate it. Alright? So you need to simulate this. Now, how do we usually talk about simulating this? Note cards, right? Typically we've been talking about, you get some note cards, you write something on them, and then you do some stuff, you put it in two piles. Okay, so, well, first of all, how many note cards do we need? Yeah, so, first of all, I believe that there are 32 total passes. We need 32 note cards, right? You can. Right. So, if you're good with this, you don't need to. If you still struggle with this, it would probably be beneficial to write this down. So, to simulate this, obviously, we're going to simulate with note cards one time. After that, isn't doing too much. All right. But what are we going to do? He had 32 pass attempts. So I'm going to need how many cards? 32 note cards. Because that's my total number of pass attempts. Now, I'm going to help you out. He completed 24 of them. Alright? And that means he had how many incompletions? 8? Alright. So, how many? So, Trayvon, what are you saying? Alright. So, 24 cards are going to be completions. 8 cards are going to be incompletions. And Trayvon says, let's go ahead and put C and I on them. Okay, that's cool. So I already have C and I written on them. I know for a fact yesterday I had more than 24 C's and 25. Alright. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. This card, no bueno. And we got 8 right here. Mine. Alright. Who's there at the beginning gets to pick up? Sure, that's what won the game. Alright. What I need is, I need someone to, well, I'll do it. Shuffling. It's kind of hard to shuffle cards at this size. And they're not like super thick. Actually, like playing cards. I don't care. Yeah,
No, you said you don't care.
come on.
That's why I don't want that much. That's why I didn't do it.
Alright. I need a volunteer to do this for me. Alright. I need you to lay these 32 cards out in the line. This card right here, you're going to go across. So, real quick, hold on. Let's make sure we understand. Hold on. Let's make sure we understand how this is happening right now. Alright? We got 32 note cards because there are 32 total pass attempts. We labeled 24 of them with a C for completion because Tony Romo completed 24 passes in the game. We labeled 8 of them with an I for incomplete because Tony Romo had 8 incomplete passes in the game. We then shuffled them up because this has to be random. Shuffle them up. Now what we're going to do is Trayvon is going to simulate. Tell me what was pass the test. So the first pass the test is right here. Second one's there. Third one, fourth. He's going to simulate. He's just going to lay him down in a line randomly. All right. 32 of them. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, after he simulates this, after he lays him down, we're going to find out his longest streak in this simulation. Okay? You're the slowest dealer in the world. No, you don't. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to flip him over. My back hurts carrying this team. That costs a lot of money to get me back. I just need to get a massage, and that costs a lot of money. I guess I better stop being a teacher and go back and get a degree and give me money. All right. So, I enjoy teaching, that's why I do it for them. But you know, at DC, sometimes some teachers get paid $100,000. What? Huh? I feel like living in DC. All right. So, all right, so it appears, guys, I want us to all pay attention here. All right? Okay, yeah, not the crazy sound like a dude over there. No. All right. So what we do is that we lay them out. So the first pass all the way down to the last pass. Right? So we want to calculate our longest. Make sure you're paying attention there. All right. We want to calculate our longest streak. Trayvon, it's right here, it's pretty long. Look, Trayvon says it's 11, I believe it. So our longest streak is 11, right? So, what would we do here? Well, what we would do at this point, so and I want you guys to understand this, is we need, in order to draw a conclusion, we need a dot plot, right? So, yes, eventually, but I want to focus here, Christian. So, first thing that here, all right, we're going to create a dot plot of our longest streaks. Okay? So how do we create this dot plot? Well, we do a simulation. We count our longest streak of completions, in this case. Our longest streak was 11. So we would put 11 on here, and it would get one dot. All right? Then what we would do is we take all these cards. We're not going to do it because that takes too much time. You're going to really slow dealer. Nope. Now you're just on YouTube. Custody. Nelson Vargas Jr. So we don't have time to simulate all these, but if we did, we lay them all back out. Let's say we got a longest streak of, let's say 8. Put a dot there. Let's say we got a longest streak. The next, so this is 2 simulations. All right. So let's say the next time, Nelson, we got a longest streak of 13. We put a dot there. We continue doing this. We want to get like 100 simulations. All right. It would take us a while to lay these cards down 100 times and shuffle them back up 100 times. All right. Especially with Trayvon being such a slow shuffler. So, what that means is we need to go use technology. So what I've already done, and you guys will see how to use this eventually, is I've created a dot plot. Okay? Here's a dot plot, Christian, of 100 simulations of that game. So each one of these dots represents the 32 passes for that game. Each one of these dots represents one game. Please understand that. Each one of these dots represents one game. So in this game right here, the longest streak in the simulated game, the longest streak of completed passes is 4. In these games right here, so in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In 7 of the 100 games, the longest streak was 5. Alright? Sir, what would be, how many games did Tony Romo have a streak of 12 passes? 2.
No. Hey, Penny.
Oh.
Wow, this is ridiculous.
You gotta go at 8:45. So, here's the thing. We got our dot plot. We're ignoring this red box so far because this is sort of the results. Now, remember, so Eric, can you remind us, what would we do? What we have our dot plot, we're at this point, what do we need to do to sort of start drawing our conclusions on the dot plot? What value do we need to locate? So I'm going to catch you on guard now. Eric, this thing, you did it correctly on your investigation. You have our hypothesis. We have both our hypotheses. We have our test statistic. We've simulated it, and we've gotten this dot plot. What value do we look for on our dot plot now?
You understood that.
P-value. We want to find our p-value, but we have to know where to start on our dot plot. Okay, you want to help out? Test statistic. In this case, it's not winning percentage because we're talking about streaks. And what you miss is we're talking about, like, does the hot hand exist in sports? All right. So, Eric, what we want to find is our test statistic. Now, because usually our test statistic would have been the difference between winning percentages. So you have a percent, and then you go to the P or the dot chart, dot plot, and find your test statistic. All right. So what we're going to do, our test statistic was 9. All right. So I highlighted it here to give us a little, here's our test statistic. And what do? We want to know, we want to count up all the dots that are equal to our test statistic or greater than our test statistic. So if we count up all these dots, I'm not going to, because I already did. There are 45 dots at 9 or higher. All right. So what that means is, in 100 simulations, there were 45 games where Tony Romo had a streak of 9 or higher. All right. So that tells us that our p-value was what? 45 out of 100. So our p-value is equal to 45. 45 out of 100. What percent is that? 45%. Okay, so we draw our conclusion the same way. If our p-value is 45%, what would our conclusion be? Is it less than 1%? No. Is it between 1 and 5%? No. So it's greater than 5%. So if our p-value is greater than 5%, does anyone remember what our conclusion is? Okay, so since our p-value, is greater than 5%, we fail to reject our null hypothesis. Because there is not convincing evidence that Tony Romo had the hot hand. Alright. Now, does that mean that we can conclude that the hot hand didn't exist? No. It just means that there's not enough evidence to support the hot hand. Alright? Does that mean that we accept that his ability is the same, or that his past attempts are independent? No. It just means that we don't have enough evidence to reject them. Okay? So, at this point, we've drawn our conclusion. We're done with this part. We looked at this example with Tony Romo. We came up with the conclusion that, no, there wasn't enough convincing evidence to support that Tony Romo had the hot hand in this game. All right? So we cannot reject our null hypothesis. Okay. So what we can say here is that it is a possibility, all right? It is a possibility that his performance, his streak of 9 completions was just due to random chance. All right? Now, if we go up here and look at this speed or this dot plot, Nelson, if we look at this dot plot, how many completions would Tony Romo have to have in a row in order for us to be able to say, yeah, he had the hot hand, or there's enough evidence to support that he had the hot hand? Yeah. How many completions in a row did Tony Romo have to get in order for us to say, yeah, he had the hot hand? Huh? Well, 9 or more, we just say he doesn't have the hot hand. Let me ask you this. In order for there to be convincing evidence that Tony Romo had the hot hand, his p-value would have to be less than what? No. Let's think about it. If Tony Romo's p-value, if the p-value for this chart was 1%, we would reject our null hypothesis, right? It has to be less than 5%. Okay? Our p-value would have to be less than 5% for us to be able to conclude, all right, that there is convincing evidence to support that Tony Romo had the hot hand. So, if there's 100 here, what would be our p-value if he completed 14, what would be our p-value? It'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of 100. We would still fail to reject our null hypothesis. What about at 15 completions? At 15 completions, our p-value would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of 100. That's 6%. That's still higher than 5%. Well, you just said, in order for us to accept our null hypothesis, it has to be lower than 5%. Well, right here you have 1, 2, 3. 3 out of 100 would be 3%. It's 3% less than 5%. Yes. So we would reject our null hypothesis and accept our alternative hypothesis if he had 16 completions or more. Okay? Questions? You're not going to have homework on that. Now, Thursday, I will not be here. Alright? You guys will have an assignment. You have and what I'm going to start doing with the assignments is you guys are going to get paper copies. Work on the paper copy, but you're still going to put it in. Alright? So, professional development.
What?
No. I don't like that. You're going to bring me cookies or no?
Why?
No, I think you want that, no, that no.
Alright, so